پروفسور نورا گلیکمن نمایشنامه نویسی آرژانتینیه که در سال 1944 در استان لا پامپا منطقه پامپاس متولد شده. بیشتر زندگی خودش رو در انگلستان و ایالات متحده گذرونده. مدرک کارشناسی ارشدش رو در رشته ادبیات اسپانیایی از دانشگاه کلمبیا و دکتراش رو در رشته ادبیات تطبیقی از دانشگاه نیویورک اخذ کرده. الان هم در کوینز کالج نیویورک به تدریس ادبیات تطبیقی و ادبیات آمریکای لاتین مشغوله. علاوه بر نمایشنامه نویسی در حوزه‌هایی مثل نوشتن داستان کوتاه، نقد ادبی و ترجمه هم فعالیت داره. بیشتر آثارش رو به دو زبان انگلیسی و اسپانیولی می‌نویسه و اغلب نمایشنامه‌های پروفسور گلیکمن در کشورهای مختلفی مثل فرانسه، انگلیس و اسپانیا به اجرا در اومده. این نویسنده آرژانتینی با تکیه بر تجربهش در تئاتر و مطالعات آکادمیکش در باب فرهنگ ییدیش زبانان آمریکای لاتین تونسته به خوبی صدای در حاشیه این گروه‌های اجتماعی رو بازتاب بده. باید اشاره کرد که دکتر گلیکمن از سال 1998 ریاست انجمن اساتید ییدیش ها رو در اختیار داره. همچنین عضو هیئت مدیره انجمن مطالعات ییدیش های آمریکای لاتین هم هست. یاشین آزاد بیگی اخیراً با ترجمه یکی از نمایشنامه‌های این نویسنده تحت عنوان زنی به نام راکل که توسط نشر چارسو منتشر شده برای اولین بار این نویسنده رو به فارسی زبانان معرفی کرده. همچنین پیش از این یکی از داستان‌های کوتاه پروفسور گلیکمن توسط همین مترجم برای اولین بار در وبسایت کنسف در اختیار مخاطبان فارسی زبان قرار گرفت. به بهانه این کتاب تازه منتشر شده گفتگویی صمیمانه داریم با پروفسور گلیکمن عزیز که در ادامه شاهد اون هستید. امیدوارم لذت ببرید.
So, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. So, as a first question, I would like to ask you to give us a short introduction about yourself.
Okay, my name is Nora Glickman. I've been living in the United States for almost half a century. I was born in Argentina. My grandparents came from the Ukraine and from Poland at the turn of the 19th century. And they felt at the time that they were very persecuted, and they were given land on the north of Argentina by Baron Hirsch, who was a philanthropist, and they started farming. And my father went on farming, and I grew up as a farmer's daughter and in the Pampas for many years. Well, my father held his farm for a long time. And so I grew up among cattle and sheep and wheat growing. And so I was the equivalent of a Jewish gaucha in the sense that I learned to horse ride and work with the farmers. I love that. So my stories have to do with that, many times of that childhood. Then I studied a high school in Bahia Blanca, which is a port city in the Argentina. And I went to college in different places. I was in Israel, I was in Great Britain, and I finished my studies, my PhD here in New York at both Columbia and NYU. And I did comparative literature, and I've been teaching literature and writing ever since. And that this is what, in short, I have a family. I have 3 children and 9 grandchildren. And I keep teaching. I love teaching. So that's teaching and writing and translating have been my greatest pleasures in traveling.
Oh, very nice, very colorful life. I'm really happy seeing you, meeting you. So the next question, your play, A Certain Raquel, has been translated into Farsi by Yashin Azad Begi. Given that this play is based upon true story, what lies behind this true story that has made you to write it down, to narrate it?
Well, yes, you know, slave trafficking is a very deep concern today. It's never stopped. And one of the ills at the beginning of the century, that's what happens in a country where there are many immigrants and very few women. So in Argentina, at the turn of the century, that was the situation. And the places that in Eastern Europe where these women were coming from, where they were told that if they went to Buenos Aires, the streets are paved with gold, they're going to find fortune and somebody's going to marry them. And their parents willingly gave these traffickers their children. And since they say they were Jewish like them, like those women, they were more trustworthy. And it turns out that those people were the worst company they could hold. And when they go to Argentina, I mean, on the way from Europe, from Marseille, when they were going on boats to Argentina, they already started prostituting them. And by the time they got there, they made a fake wedding. It was a pretense wedding, and the girls fell for it. And then they could not run away. They could not. They were exploited, just like there are many women exploited today.
Yeah.
That is what when I read a play about it, Ibergus, it was new to me. It was a new thing, a new item, and so I integrated that play into my story. And it just happened just by chance that the biography of this woman, Raquel Lieberman, was forecasted on the radio, and my mother heard the radio, and then also the granddaughter of that woman said, "Oh, but that is my grandmother." She didn't know that when she saw the photograph. So she went to the press, and then my mother called me and says, "You're working on this subject in New York. Come and meet this woman." I mean, the children of this woman. So by then, the woman had died in 1930s, you see. So I met the son, and I asked for permission, and then the granddaughter gave me a bunch of letters that were sent from Poland and from into Argentina and back. And they were written in Yiddish. And that is when this woman, when I learned about her, and it turned out that she had come to Argentina with 2 little children, waiting for her husband to join her. But by the time that they were together, he died of tuberculosis. So she was left alone. And she did what many women do when they have no choice. She gave the children to somebody to look after, and they tried different sorts of ways of living, earning a living. And then she fell into the trap of the prostitution network. And that's how she practiced prostitution until she could have enough and amass enough information to go to the police and tell her case. And by the time she was lucky to have a judge that listened to her, and that brought many of these men to trial. Some of them ran away, some of them had sentences. So that was the turn of events.
Yeah, but how brave of her.
Yes, absolutely. And so in my play, she talks to her granddaughter, even though she's dead. The granddaughter asks her questions: "How come you did all this, and how did you get to that?" And then so it is a kind of it is documentary, and the rest of it is fiction, of course.
Yeah. The next question is, some writers like Samuel Beckett have written in 2 languages. You have also written in Spanish and English. How was this experience in writing in 2 languages for you?
Well, as you know, you carry a language that you were brought up in, your mother language, your mother tongue, all your life.
Yeah.
And then you see that, especially if you are in America, in which there are so many languages being spoken. English is the first language, of course, but there's a lot of Spanish going on here. So you can really manage in the subway or in the streets, we speak Spanish. And I teach Spanish, so Spanish never left me. But in order to be to reach more readers and to reach more people and to feel more at ease, I feel that I have to work in English as well. And all my critical work is in English. But my fiction is always first in Spanish, and then I translate myself, or I have somebody translate me, like in this case, because there are languages I don't know, and I was so pleased that Farsi was one of the languages that it's been translated on. But mostly I write in Spanish, and then I translate into English.
Yeah. Do you think writing in Spanish has the same influence as writing in English? Does it affect the concept of the text or the conveying of the concepts somehow? Or
yeah, well, there are many words in slang and many popular idioms that come in Spanish, and of course songs and poetry. It's natural that you should say it in Spanish. But since I studied comparative literature, I was very pleased to be able to read the stories in French and in Italian and in Portuguese, which are languages I studied. So I keep on writing myself in Spanish, but there are sometimes if I speak, for example, if I say things in a Gaucho-esque language, which is as the Gauchos would speak, the Cauben in Argentina, that is impossible to translate. So you try for the best way to this equivalent to that. You hope that it will sound right. And sometimes it comes out in Spanglish, which is a combination of the two. And sometimes there are certain words that are introduced that I did not know that I learned in English at the first time. I did, my vocabulary is growing all the time. And so being in a world that accepts multilingualism makes me much more cosmopolitan, you see.
Yes.
Easier to relate to people the more languages you speak, and the more eager you are to open yourselves to the beauty of so many languages. Like, if it's opera, it would be Italian, and these things that you accept, and you welcome what the influence of other languages, of course.
Yeah, totally. Considering Mr. Dobati's introduction on this anthology, how much Argentinian history and culture inspired you to write your plays?
Well, you know that Argentina is a land of immigrants, and people come from all over the world. So it is mostly Italian and Spanish, but it has minorities from all other places. So that when I was studying the turn of the century, the periods of immigration, I studied a subgenre called sainete. And the sainete are short plays in which you characterize or you stereotype different types of immigrants. And because the writers were mostly of Italian and Spanish origin, they would put the ending of the words of the origin of the immigrants. For example, if you came from Russia, everything would be Ovich or Itski or Itski. They don't speak those languages. And I was curious about the way they were distorting languages, and people enjoyed seeing themselves in a way stereotyped, but also trying to overcome it and learn proper Spanish. So that is how I thought that this kind of a confluence of languages and origins and destinies of different people made it into interesting literature. And that's why my stories have to do with coming from one place and trying to adapt to another, but being yourself and this kind of encounters of different cultures.
Yeah. It seems that your focus is mostly in most of your works on women rights and issues. What is the reason behind this? And
as you know, women have taken second place in many countries and in many cultures. And the boom, which is a phenomenon that came out in Argentina, in Latin America in the 60s, chose Garcia Marquez and Vargas Llosa and Fuentes and Cortázar. They're all men.
yeah.
They skipped the women, and that is not that women were not writing. They were writing. These people like Luisa Valenzuela was already a good writer. Isabel Allende has already started to write, and so I thought that it would be interesting to explore the world of these women. Actually, I would tell you just now, I finished the book, which I'll be glad to send you, which are interviews with Latin American women directors. Because this is not just in literature, in cinema is the same.
Yeah.
So you see how many, you talk about Almodóvar, you talk about Saura, but women directors have not been recognized enough, except for Bemberg, perhaps in Argentina. But that is because her father was a famous producer and so on. So women themselves were not given enough credit. So I think that my role was that to discover, to work with or about on their production, and teach women writers like Marta Brunet and Isabel Allende and Luisa Valenzuela and many others that have interesting stories, because they suffered a lot trying to compete in that world and trying to make a name for themselves. And so I think that women have to help in that effort to promote their work. And this book that I'm telling you about, this anthology of women directors, has them from every country, from Cuba and Puerto Rico and in the Dominican Republic and in Colombia and Brazil. So there are talents in all these countries that deserve to be studied and recognized.
Yes, I'm really grateful that you have this view. Considering the we go back to your play, Certain Raquel. Considering the situation of the characters of the Certain Raquel, there is the question of returning to social and individual identity. What is your own idea about this?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I understand your question very well, but I think that by promoting the situation of the women as such as Raquel, I am talking about my own feeling that women have to be recognized for what they do as independent women. You know, I may be married, I may have children, but I have to make something of myself.
Yes.
And what I admire about this character is that she did not stop at seeing the injustice and doing nothing about it. She acted on it, and acting on it is sometimes, you know, when the proceso in Argentina, when the years of dictatorship, I belonged to a group who was trying to take people out of, with Amnesty International, trying to help them get people out of prison, or advocate in United Nations about the names of the people who were being held. And I think that it is just like Raquel Lieberman did on behalf of the other women. I think that it is something that we all ought to make an effort to promote when there are cases like that. And of course, there's always a country that has that needs that, right?
Yeah, totally. You mentioned this the technique subplot of Ibergus. Yes. One of the technique that you use in your play. I want to know in your own words about this, about the techniques in this place, in your own words.
This is a meta theater in which a play, another play works within a play. Yeah. So that in this case, the women who were prisoners of the traffickers were allowed two things. They spoke Yiddish among themselves. And so they were allowed to go to the theater and listen to Yiddish plays. And then they would go back to the brothels, so that the other people who saw them were against the traffickers, and there would be clashes in the theater itself. So I thought that phenomenon was very interesting. And I introduced that play first of all, my mother and I translated the play into Spanish because it was in Yiddish, translated into Spanish. And then I said, this play would fit into my play. So we integrated that in this particular, the section in which the women go to the theater to see plays in Yiddish, and the so-called pure women of the society who are not involved were against the traffickers and against these women. These are low-class women. How dare they come in and say, watch culture with us? And so these clashes to me were very interesting, because some of the so-called pure members of the community were wanting to separate from the rest. They would say, you have to go to a different burial place if somebody dies. I won't allow that. So that they would be like one same society, divided, and that makes for drama, of course, because that is what you want in drama is conflict, and that conflict was justified to me.
Yeah, totally. How much is the audience important to you while you're writing?
When I'm writing, I don't care about anything else but what I'm writing. When I finish writing, I say, who's going to watch it? Who's going to read it? So I was lucky that my play, A Certain Raquel, got the attention of university professors. And there's one, Cornell University invited me to give a workshop to their students. And then they have a theater group. And then they said, there's such a thing as international universities for students to see plays by different dramatists. So we toured. I went with the students. We went to Brussels first, and then we went to to Mexico, and then they went to where else? To Colombia. So these places, this travel with them. And there is one day we had a funny incident that in the play there is I state that he should point a gun to somebody, one character to another. Well, the students took a toy gun, a black toy gun, in the plane, and so they were stopped. We were all stopped, all the whole group. There were 15 of us, and they said it's a plastic play gun, and it's only for this play. But the play was delayed because they were seeing through the machines as we were going to Europe. And that was a time in which, of course, today you would not dare do that. But at the time we did that. And it was funny because it was just because of this little gun of the play that the whole flight was delayed. But yes, I do that. I like to be able to show it to students, and I like to have the reactions after that. I had one case in which at the beginning there is a brothel scene, and the girl is supposed to be dressed very, with just the underwear. Or the boyfriend of this girl went to Brussels, and he took her out of the play because he was very upset that she was doing that. So you have to keep your civility and your and be properly dressed and so on. So it was it gave to me all these things were new. I did not think that it would happen, but if we are free and students today they do anything they want, but still there were rules that we followed, and this play taught me some things.
Yes. So how was the response of critics and audience to the performance of us?
Well, first of all, they didn't know about it. They didn't know that this was going on, and then they started making parallels. This happens in our country too. And we have women being enslaved, and we want the women or children to be taken care of, and people be aware of it. So it was interesting, and of course they had subtitles. Well, at the time they had overtitles. It was over the screen, but the people were very responsive. Yes. And of course, after that, movies started being made and documentaries. More and more things came up after that. Yes.
How did you choose the music of this play? Did you especially emphasize in choosing the tangos or Jewish folklore music?
I asked them to put music of the period that was done in the 30s. And that is what the beginning of tango also. Tango music was danced at brothels when men danced with each other, waiting for the women to attend to them. As they waited, the men danced the tango among themselves. Then they became man, woman. And it was low class, very shabby, until the French discovered the tango. So they took it to Paris, and tango became famous. And that's when Argentina said, aha, we can the tango, exploited. And he came back to Argentina already as an Argentine music. But it was really, it was started very, very low. And then up all the way, and it returned as in a new form. And of course, you had all the tango groups at the time with bandoneon, with accordions, and later on, it was people like Astor Piazzolla, who lived in France, but he wrote tangos for Argentina. So they became a very popular type of music. And of course, I also wanted some Yiddish music, some Hasidic music to combine with it, because this reflected the old world. And I wanted to have that combination of all the new. And usually, if you let the director use his own choices, usually he would make good choices. I mean, that has been my experience. So I trust them to choose the exact music, but I make suggestions only, and then they take it from there.
Yeah. As you know, as you also mentioned, Isabel Allende is one of the most well-known woman writers. How much you consider your views similar to those of hers in your writing?
Well, as you know, Isabel started off being part of a diplomatic family. The her father and her uncle, Allende, so that she grew up in that milieu. but she also saw what persecution is like in Chile. She had to run away. She had to be exiled in Venezuela, and then she came she lives in California. So that her trajectory is similar to many Latin Americans who had to flee their country and find another way of expressing themselves. Now she always wrote. She started as a journalist, and I didn't. I started with short stories, but as a journalist, she learned to tell what happened. And she said, I was a terrible journalist because I was fantasizing too much. So I was told that it's better for me to be a writer of short stories. And it is true. I think that what she does is she takes historic events, like I like to do, and then she adapts them and creates a world around them, a dramatic world around them. And that works very well. And mostly his women, she likes writing about women who like to tell stories. So that we have in common. And then we also have in common that we had children the same age. When her daughter Paula died, I wrote to her. I was, it was very, very upsetting. She felt that her daughter, she had to speak to her daughter as she was dying. She was convalescing for a long time. And so she wrote Paula. And so we communicated then. And since then, I've been very fond of her writings because she's not, I wouldn't say that she's very mostly original. She's not aiming at that. She's meaning a showing the world of real people and in a historical background that you can relate to. Can be people who are discovering golden mines or looking for golden mines in Chile, or it could be somebody who's discovering paintings in Haiti. It doesn't matter. They have some reality, some concreteness about it, and also some familiarity of people talking to each other and domesticity, which I like.
How do you analyze a contemporary literature of Latin American women, and how do you see their future?
Well, what Latin American women are doing now is something that they didn't attempt to do before, in the sense that they are integrating regional literature. Before, I come from a province. I don't come from Buenos Aires. So people who come from the capital have always been centralized. If you come from the capital, everybody knows Buenos Aires. Everybody knows Mexico City. But now what you see is that the people from the provinces, from the mountains, from the rivers and the down south, from the Amazon, are talking in their own languages along with Spanish, so that they are bringing new ways of looking at life and at literature and at customs. In many of them are oral things that their mothers and their grandmothers told them. So it is not so much men writing; it is women talking about family things, talking about birth, talking about losing their child, talking about taking care of their parents, about domestic things, along with new language idioms and dialects. So now you see other languages appearing. That before, if you had talked Guarani, nobody would listen to Guarani. They would say, no, Spanish, translate. No, but they say, okay, you can integrate that language, the languages of your own area, where at the Andes, the mountain areas, or the ocean areas, and integrate them into Spanish and make the Spanish richer. And so that not only that, but they also have new readers. The readers that can that see, this is about us. And then not only that people say, but your community is not so different from my community. So this is not the central Buenos Aires or the central Mexico or the central Uruguay. It is really the mountains and the valleys and the rivers that are around that area, you see. And that is what is important. And that is what these women write about. So new names are appearing all the time, and very young writers. And because of Zoom and because of the pandemic, women are communicating much more. I would not have met you perhaps if it had not been that we are learning how to work on Zoom and talk to each other. So we have new audiences, and I can be many, many miles away from you, but I feel very close to you. And this is what's happening.
Yeah. So it's a very bright future I'm happy.
So if you know how to use it, we have to be careful not to get sick, not to get, you have to take care of yourself.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I think that the world is becoming smaller in the sense that we get closer to each other. And we
Exactly.
give each other a hand. I'm looking for to get some. Aka, I have an address for you, and this is something that they didn't have before.
Yeah. Who are your favorite writers and filmmakers? A
Oh, well,
little light question.
I'm discovering them all the time.
Yes.
I've always been fond of the realist neo-realist cinema in Italy. I've been all fond of the auteur cinema in France, but I've always been fond of Almodovar in Spain and of Saura. Those are the kind of traditional, well-known cinema directors. But as I tell you, these women that I've been interviewing, well, this is not me. I've only interviewed one. I've only edited the book with a colleague, Patricia Nuriel. But 11 interviews of these women, we've discovered women who are very interested in documentaries that tell about little communities in different countries, and that documentaries that follow human rights groups and follow issues that are concerned to all the other women. So there is a lot of solidarity among these workers, and also these women employ other women who had not had dreamt before that they would be in the cinema world. And the same goes for writing. There are more workshops that include other women. I myself organize with other colleagues, 2 more colleagues every year, summer workshops for writing. And it's because of the pandemic, what's been happening, for example, I'll give you an example, the theater workshop. So we have 1 month in which everybody has to write a short scene or a one act play, whatever they want to write. So we meet every week and they work every week. At the end of it, they have to show what they've done. So we put it on Zoom and everybody reads it. But this year, because of the pandemic, the actors were out of work in Venezuela. So they said, okay, we are going to read this plays for you. But not just, they didn't just read them, they acted them. And they acted them. And some of the actors were in Spain, some of them in Venezuela, some of them in America. And they did the parts as if they were in one place, but everyone was in different places. So what came out was that these students, all of a sudden, after 1 month of writing, they saw the play produced.
Wow.
And it was fantastic. So I wrote 2 articles about it in journals. Look now what you can do with Zoom. You can not only write, you can produce. And so they took their costumes and they took the lights and they took, it was fantastic what you could do, because it didn't cost them anything. Each one was doing it from his own home. You see, so this is what I think that new writers are coming up now, that they have, unfortunately, they have to be also technologically knowledgeable, or to have some technician who will help them, because otherwise you don't have enough. You can fail. You can start and then you lose your audience. But on the other hand, you can have a wider audience. We can have for this place we had about 150 people from different countries, so that if you advertise enough and you get to know them. This is the 3rd year which we're doing it, and every year it gets better. I hope that you will be able to join us next time. I'll invite you to see what we're doing. Yes,
that would be great. Do you have any other works to be published in the future? You said about this documentary and interviews, but
yes. Well, I am doing 2 things just now. Translating some more of my stories into English, because I would like to have them better known in this country. And I'm also working on the correspondence of 2 main writers from Spain that were exiled in Germany, and they wrote to each other, so that for 30 years there's something like 150 letters. And they because they were professors in Germany of Latin American literature, they have a lot of exchange of opinions on culture and on the education and on philosophy. And so these letters will be, I hope they will be published soon. And that is, it pleases me to be able to work on that. That is a genre that is being lost now because people write emails, they don't write letters.
Yes.
But letters, you can, before you write a letter, you think of what you're going to say, you prepare yourself, and you grow a friendship in letters, which is not the same as the email, which is too fast.
Yeah. Imagine that you have a tribune and microphone, and the whole world could hear you. What would you tell them?
Well, depends on the audience of who would that. If it's young people, I would say before you decide what you want to do with yourself, think before you start doing about the thing you like the most, which may be writing or playing an instrument or reciting. Think of what might work for you to be able to survive in this world. Think of something practical that you can do that will work along with the things that you like to do. But don't just think that because you want to paint, you'll be a painter, or because you play the flute, you'll be a flutist, because that won't give you a way of surviving. And so I would say, first of all, think of something that serves your family in your future. And then try to find time along with it to do the things that you love, because then you won't be bored, you'll be growing. And the other thing I say to people like me, reread the things that you liked reading when you were younger and see how you've changed from when reading it second time. If you look at an author that you loved, look at him again and see how you relate to that author 50 years later or 40 years later, and see if you're still impressed by him or her. And then of course keep all your eyes open to music and to art, because those are comforters that you can rely on always. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, totally. Thank you so much, Professor Nora Glickman.
Thank you for having.
For
It was a
this
pleasure.
beautiful conversation and talk.